There we go. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, guys. Today we have a very amazing guest, a man who's influenced my life, Dr. E. Michael Jones. How are you doing today, Dr. Jones?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Before we get into the conversation, let you a little background. I grew up in a Mexican neighborhood in Southern California, and I started looking at my family history. And when my great grandpa was alive, he served in the military. There was a Catholic church which everybody went to in the neighborhood. Single mother ratios were very low. Many of my family had trades, owned small businesses. Fast forward to the time I'm growing up, rap music, gangster movies. I went into the route of the streets. I went to state prison for 8 years, and eventually I developed a relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, you got kicked out of academia. Would you please let the viewers know kind of what you went through and how you ended up owning your own publishing company?
I was hired by the St. Mary's College in 1979 to teach, be a professor of American literature. 1 year after I got here, I was fired because of articles I'd written against abortion in the local newspaper. So I was kind of surprised that I could get fired from the Catholic College for being against abortion. But what I realized is that over that period of time, the feminists had basically taken over St. Mary's College. And that led me to believe that something big had happened here. And so I decided to get out of academia and start a magazine that would allow me to do research into what had really happened. I didn't understand the magnitude of what would happen to academe when I made this decision. But it became apparent to me afterwards that I never could have done the research that I needed to do if I were still in academic life. So it was sort of God taking what seemed to be a bad thing at that time and then turning it into some type of good that I couldn't have anticipated.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. And one thing I noticed that I kind of relate to you in, once I started living a better life, I came home. I dedicated to a career in the Iron Workers Union. I was trained in mathematics. I had more children. And the more I spoke truth to the people that I lived in poverty with, I got a kind of bad reaction, not the one I would expect. In your opinion, the state we're in today, why is the truth so rebellious nowadays?
Because we live in a system that is based on controlling people for the benefit of the rich and powerful. And truth, this is an old dispute. I mean, in Plato's Republic, Socrates talks to Thrasymachus, and Thrasymachus says the truth or justice is the opinion of the powerful. So it's always been that way. There's always been a temptation for the rich and the powerful to want to control the poor people of this world. But what happened over this period of time was that a change in technology. So that in the terms of Greece, of Athens in the 4th century BC, you had to go into the agora, you give speeches, you talk to people face to face, and then you went home. And home was a kind of refuge from that public life. Well, now there is no refuge from public life, and technology has allowed people to intrude deeper and deeper into your life as a form of control. So what I started looking into was this technology of control, and I found that basically sexual liberation is in many ways the best form of control, because that's the simplest way to get inside you, because it controls your passions. If you abdicate rational control of your passions, these people will take outside control of your passions, and they will manipulate you according to these principles. Now, about 20 years ago, I was in, I'd say 25 years ago, I was in Los Angeles and giving a series of talks there. And at that point, I saw the crucial turning point for the Mexicans there. Basically, the Mexicans were, now you'd go and you'd see billboards that were kind of half in Spanish and half in English that were urging Mexicans to drink beer and become part of hip-hop culture. I warned the people at this time that this was what was happening. They needed to get back in contact with their ethnic culture and also with the church, which is what preserves ethnic culture. Without the church, ethnic culture is doomed, especially when you move the ethnic culture to a different country. It's doomed in places like Ireland, even when the people don't move, if you don't have the church to protect it. But it's especially vulnerable when you're an immigrant and you move to another place. And I think that's what happened. The Mexicans were targeted. The point of this was to turn Mexicans into Negroes. This was hip hop culture. It was black. It had been created over a period of time after the 60s, in many ways in reaction to the revolutionary movement of the 60s. They created a culture that basically took control of the blacks, and now they had kind of perfected this culture, and now it was the Mexican turn to basically sign up for this destructive culture, gang culture.
Yeah, wow, connecting the dots. I have family that I can trace back to some of the original barrios in LA, and they said that once jazz music came out, the culture was Americanized. They started partying, and then you have in the 70s and 80s release of American Me, Blood In, Blood Out, all funded by Paramount Pictures, and they depict Mexicans as honorable gangsters doing what they have to do. And it's crazy because I grew up watching these movies, and I wanted to be that, and it's
Right.
crazy.
This happened in black culture. I know exactly when it happened. I've written about it. It's in Culture Wars. It was the FBI went after the Black Panthers in late 1960s, around 1969, and in Chicago the police, the FBI, had a COINTELPRO operation where they had a double agent working for them inside Black Panther headquarters in Chicago. The guy put basically barbiturates in their Kool-Aid in what they were drinking, and then the police came in and killed them all. Now, this spread terror throughout Chicago, the black population in Chicago. I know because I knew a woman who was involved with the Black Panthers at that time. She said everyone was terrorized at that point. They all thought the police were going to come in and kill them. At this moment in time, you suddenly saw this movie appear called Shaft. You can look it up. It's probably on YouTube. This is the movie, and then it was followed by Superfly, in which suddenly the Negro stopped being a revolutionary and he became a pimp. This was all created by a guy named Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks was the director of the first movie. His son was the director of the second. He was a photographer, a black man, photographer for Life magazine. And his job was to be black. And that meant if you needed to send somebody to photograph the Nation of Islam, for example, send this guy. He's real black. He's real dark. And they will let you in. And that's exactly what they did. They were so blinded by their own racial ideology that they didn't understand that a black man could be a double agent. He wasn't working for black people. He was working for the oligarchs. He was working for the CIA. Why do I say that? Because I interviewed his third wife. Okay, and I said, was he working for the CIA? And she said, no, that's ridiculous. And then she says to me, but every time he got back from a trip, he was debriefed by the CIA. Well, wait a minute, you were working for the CIA because Time Life was a front for the CIA. And so his job was to create a new paradigm for black people in America. And the new paradigm, as I said, was Shaft and it was Superfly. So it was a promiscuous kind of detective in the first instance and a pimp. No question about it. A pimp in the second. And suddenly what this lady was telling me, my friend, the black lady from the South Side of Chicago, is suddenly everybody starts dressing like a pimp. They're all dressing like the pimp. This is the CIA coming in and taking control of your culture through the mass media. And so all I'm saying here is that happened to black people in the 70s. And then it eventually evolved into this kind of hip-hop culture, whatever you want to call it. Hip-hop was the word that was used in these half Spanish language ads that I saw in Los Angeles at the time. So what you're doing now is recruiting Mexicans. You're getting the Mexicans to basically abandon their traditional culture, traditional Catholic culture, and adopt this hedonistic, sexually liberated gangster culture as a replacement. That's a form of control. That's not liberation, that's control. And what you see is the result. The families get wrecked over a period of 1 or 2 generations, and then you got this huge dysfunctional group of people.
Wow, that's amazing. I wanted to get into how is something like the Black Panthers funded? Do they start on their own? I know you spoke on that. If you would let the viewers know how something like that comes to be so publicized and then done so dirty by the same people that started.
Yeah, well, the short answer to that is the Jews funded the Black Panthers. Okay, there's a man by the name of David Horowitz. He wrote the book on it. He was the funder. So he went to the man who was the producer of Easy Rider. Okay, Easy Rider. This is interesting too. Okay, this is the 50th anniversary now of the release of Easy Rider, which is about a kind of motorcycle, 2 guys on motorcycles dealing with drugs. The Mexicans play a big role in this movie because the Mexicans are portrayed as this traditional culture that is the alternative to American culture, okay? So anyway, David Horowitz gets the money from Bert Schneider. Bert Schneider is the producer of Easy Rider, and what they do is they turn the black people into proxy warriors for the Jews. That's the whole story in a nutshell. This is the end of a long history in America, which began basically at the time of the murder, the hanging, the lynching of Leo Frank, when the ADL, these Jewish espionage operations, they come into existence. And the whole point is of the Black-Jewish Alliance, is what I'm talking about, is the Jews come down, they want to turn the blacks into revolutionaries, and they want to create a slave rebellion in the South. So for 70 years, that's what happened. That was the role, that was the symbiotic relationship you had between the blacks in places like the Black Panthers and the Hollywood money men, the Jews behind them who were paying them to act out their revolutionary fantasies.
Wow, thank you for that. Very clear, very clear. So I wanted to get now one big thing, because a lot of young men watch this show, is I noticed one thing is pornography. Not only is it free, it's in HD and it's available in your pocket. In a world where everything is charged, Netflix, Hulu, do you believe that pornography is freedom, Dr. Jones?
No, of course it isn't. If it were, no, of course it isn't. The fact that it's free, let's take a step back here, okay? We just had a huge discussion about the internet, about hate speech and violence on the internet. Let's concentrate on violence for once. Hate speech leads to violence. There are people who accuse me if I criticize what I just did. If I say, for example, that the producer of Easy Rider was a Jew and that he was funding the Black Panthers, they call me an anti-Semite, okay? And then they say this is hate speech, and then they say I should be banned. What is the one big issue that's missing from all of this discussion about the internet? Pornography. Nobody is discussing pornography at all. It's completely excluded from any type of discussion of violence. Now, I'm old enough to understand that 25 years ago, there were feminists who were saying that pornography is violence against women. This was Catherine McKinnon, Andrea Dworkin. That was shut down. That discussion was shut down by Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan, her maiden name is Goldstein. She's a Jewish communist from the 1930s. She shut that discussion down, okay, and said, no, feminists are for pornography. They're not against pornography. This is just part of the things that you need to know to understand pornography. So the best example I can give you here is the one that I've used. I've given this in a speech all around the world. Okay, in 2002, the Israeli Defense Force goes into Ramallah. Okay, it's one of the many incursions that they get to go into to harass Palestinians. They take over the TV stations and they start broadcasting pornography over the TV stations. Now, why did they do that? Do the Israelis want to liberate the Palestinians? No, no. What this proves is that pornography is a form of warfare. This was a weapon that the Israelis used against Palestinians. It is psychological warfare against the Palestinian people. Why is that? Why is that? Well, I said you can go back to the Bible, the story of Samson and Delilah. Okay, Samson was a powerful warrior in Israel. Nobody could beat him in battle, but they discovered he had a weakness, and the weakness was sex. So Samson is seduced by Delilah. She's a Philistine woman. He's seduced by her. And what does she do? She cuts his hair, but she also gouges out his eyes. Now, what does this mean? St. Thomas Aquinas would say, lust makes you blind. That's what the symbol of gouging out the eyes meant. In other words, if you're blind, if you're blinded by your passions, which is exactly what pornography does to you, you can't fight. You can't resist. And that's why the Israelis broadcast pornography to the Palestinians. They know it's psychological warfare. They know they're forcing this on these people as a way of distracting them and rendering them blind so that they can't oppose what the Israelis are doing. That's what the meaning of pornography is.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, I hear your story. You were kicked out of academia, and for most, that would have been very heartbreaking. You know, kind of like when I left the gang, I was socially shamed, and it's like they've created something where you're scared because you want to participate. You don't want to be the outsider. But would you explain to the viewers the importance of suffering through all of that for a better good?
Yeah, you're right. It was involved with suffering. It's in retrospect, I look back on there. I had been married for 10 years. I had 2 children at that point. I moved my family out here. We bought a house. I had a mortgage, and then I got fired. So I have no prospects whatsoever. I have no way to support my family, and I have to finish out my contract because I don't have any other source of money. So for 9 months, I had to go into this place, into this environment where everybody treated me as if I had some type of disease. You know, like, don't go near this guy because you'll catch his disease and you'll get fired too. So there was a lot of suffering involved in it. And my prayer at this point was, Lord, why did you lead us out of Egypt only to perish in the wilderness? Why did you lead me out of Philadelphia only to get fired? So not too long ago, last summer, my mother died, and my wife and I were driving back to Philadelphia, and I said to her, if you knew that I was going to be fired 1 year after I got hired, would you have come out here? And she said, no. And I said, well, I wouldn't either. Who in his right mind would move halfway across the country to be fired? No one would do that. And the point here is, that's precisely why God doesn't allow you to know the future. Because if you knew that, you still wouldn't know the future. Because that's only part of the future. And the other part of it is that was what allowed me to do what I'm doing today. If I hadn't done that, if that hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I wouldn't have anything to say to you because I wouldn't have done any of the research. The only reason I've done all of this research is because of the evil that I discovered at that point. And I said there must be some type of explanation of that evil and how it happened. And that's what I've been doing for 40 years now. So the point here is after it finally, so the last attempt that this woman did to me, to stab me in the back, turned out to be the very thing that created the magazine. So at that point, I remember reading the Bible, and it said, Joseph said to his brothers, he said, after they had sold him into slavery in Egypt, and then the famine breaks out in Israel, and suddenly they have to go to him. And he says to them, after he reveals to himself who he is, he says, the evil that you intended to do to me has been turned by God's power. That is the story of human history. That's why it's in the Bible. It's not in the Bible just for entertainment. It's there because it's a paradigm of something much bigger. And I'm saying this is the meaning of human history. That all evil has some type of meaning because God allows it. He doesn't will it, but he allows it, and he allows it because he can bring some type of greater good out of that evil. I can understand this part in my life. I'm sure you could tell me stories about how evil has been turned to good in your life. And I think it's basically our job to explain this to people, because people live in a world where they're just completely bewildered. They don't understand anything, and they're suffering, and they don't see any point to their suffering.
No, exactly. Actually, when I got to a place so deep in evil, I was so ashamed of myself. And when I started reading scripture, it's the only time I've ever felt worthy of anything, of any type of better. And as I read deeper and deeper, it changed me completely. Now, Christianity saved my life. I'm so grateful for it. I wanted to get more into this book right here, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. I'll put the link below.
Yeah.
This opened up so much more insight, because by the time I grew up, the only churches around were Protestant churches. But there were so many contradictions within the church that it disgusted me. Everyone that went there wasn't really living. You know, we kind of just go once a week to say we were at church. The pastor was preaching to tithe or go to hell. It kind of never made sense to me, where I started doubting it. But then I got into Catholicism. I started reading the history of the church, and it kind of opened my eyes to me. In your opinion, what would you tell someone to convince them that the Catholic Church is true Christianity?
Well, what's the alternative to the Catholic Church? It's Protestantism. And to get specific about California, I mean, one of the main engines of deracination for Mexicans is joining a Protestant sect. I mean, let's be honest here. I know this from experience. One of my daughter-in-laws is a Mexican, and I met her relatives, and the relatives were in many ways just swept away by this prosperity gospel.
Yeah,
it was like guys saying, God wanted me to have that BMW. And this is why I joined this church, because nobody in the Catholic Church ever told me that God wanted me to have a BMW. So therefore, since I really want a BMW, I'll trim religion to suit my desires. That's not what religion is. That's not the way it works, but that's the perversion of it that has come into being largely because of the Protestant Reformation, which was its own version of the prosperity gospel, because the Reformation began with looting. It was basically aristocrats who wanted church property and were willing to steal it and break with the church to give some type of aura of respectability to their theft. That's the beginning of Protestantism. And the Mexicans who joined Protestant churches are joining basically the descendants of a looting operation. Why do you want to do that? If there's one group of people that was created by the Catholic Church, it was Mexicans. Okay, I was in Guadalajara. I knew about Our Lady of Guadalupe before, because everybody knows about Our Lady of Guadalupe. But then I'm sitting there in this church in Guadalajara, and I'm looking at that image, and it suddenly occurred to me, this is a country that was created by the Blessed Mother. It was basically, the aftermath. We can't be squeamish about this either. Okay? The people who ruled Mexico were brutal. The Aztecs had a culture that was based on human sacrifice that was so evil that only military force could have destroyed it. And the leaders of that military force were Cortez, and he brought the Spaniards over with them, and it was Cortez. Cortez, I mean, he was a brave man. He was a great fighter, but he couldn't have done it with 115 Spaniards. I guarantee you that. He had to mobilize all of the people, the Indians, the Indian population that had been oppressed by the Aztecs.
And they traded on them very easily. They sold out the Aztecs because of their unfair rule. And that's why you see a lot of people leaving gangs as well. That's a very touchy subject with the community that I grew up in. But it's
I know
true.
it is. I can see, look, the same thing that's happening among the Mexicans with the Aztecs is happening in Scandinavia with their newfound pagan religions, going back to worshiping Thor. and Woden, or the Irish going back to worshiping with the Druids as their spiritual leaders. It's partially due to the decay of Christianity or the decay of Catholicism, but it's also being promoted. This whole return to the Aztecs is a way of uprooting the Mexican people who were created as the cosmic race by Our Lady of Guadalupe. There's no way to get around it. And the cosmic race was this blending, this peaceful blending of Indians and Europeans in this new race of mestizos that is the Mexican identity. There's nothing beyond that.
No, yeah. And one thing I noticed that they weren't tyrants. They had children with the locals. They built churches. They modernized Mexico. Like you said, they were the current vehicle of Logos. It was a blessing. I'd rather much live under that rule than of an Aztec rule. So I want to get into now what got you into writing the Jewish revolutionary spirit. And if you can just touch on Logos for the viewers, please.
The immediate cause was the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. At this point, I realized that a group of Jewish revolutionaries known as neoconservatives had basically taken over our government and were using the powers of the government for the benefit of Israel and not for the United States. So I watched that happen, and I thought, this can't be happening, but it was happening. And so at that point, I decided I have to explain something. And so the question is then, well, what's a Jewish revolutionary? And then the question before that is, well, what's a Jew? Because no one will give it. Certainly the Jews won't ever explain that to you, but no one knew precisely what a Jew was. So how do you discover that? Well, you have to go back to the beginning, the beginning of the Jewish identity, which is not Moses, it's not Abraham, it's the time of Christ. When the Hebrew people, okay, the Israelites, who are God's chosen people, are now confronted with a choice. Either you accept the Messiah on his terms, or you reject him on your terms. And that split the Israelites, that split the Hebrew people between the group that accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah. That group is now known as the Catholic Church. Those descendants of those Hebrews are known as Christians. Okay? The group that rejected them are known as Jews. The straight line in history goes from Moses to Jesus to the Catholic Church. The breaking point in history comes when this group known as the Jews appear, which is described in the Gospel of St. John. Okay? So what is a Jew? You can't talk about it racially. Anti-Semitism is a word that was created by a guy who wanted to give a racial definition of what a Jew is. You can't do it. All you have to do is read the Gospel of St. John, and a passage like, the parents of the man born blind refused to speak out of fear of the Jews, because the Jews threatened to expel from the synagogue anyone who said that Jesus was the Messiah. Well, from a racial point of view, they're all Jews. Everyone's a Jew from a racial point of view, but the term the Jews in the Gospel of St. John has a different meaning. It means the group that rejected Jesus Christ. And when you reject Jesus Christ, as St. John tells you, you're rejecting Logos, because Jesus Christ is the Logos incarnate. And when you reject the Logos, you become a revolutionary, and that's what the Jews have been ever since. And that is the identity of the Jews that needed to be clarified, and that's why I wrote that book, which is now 11 years ago when the book finally came out.
All right, that's amazing. So basically we see a sort of theological war that's been going on for 2,000 years between Catholics and Jews.
Or between Logos and anti-Logos. And that's the book that I just finished, which is basically a history of Logos as this battle between those two forces in history. This is the armature, the grammar of history. This is what history is about. Human beings have the ability to make choices based on reason. They can reject the good and choose a lesser good instead. They can choose passion over reason. That's the story of human history. We don't know what the outcome is because we don't know. The outcome is based on all of these people making all of these choices. You know, that's why it's a drama. Because the drama revolves around human beings and their choices. Am I going to choose the good or am I going to choose my passions over what I know is good? That's what human history is about, and that's why this book needs to be written.
Of course, I agree totally. One thing I know that these sophisticated forms of slavery work so well. When I was growing up, I was convinced that ethnic Europeans were just white. I came to find eventually people are Irish, Scottish, Danish. How do they pull things like this off of convincing people things like this? Not only that,
well, I mean, what you're talking about, I cover this in my book, The Slaughter of Cities. What you're talking about is a campaign of social engineering that began after World War II. After World War II, the United States had defeated fascism, and the people who felt they had defeated fascism felt that the new enemy was the Catholic Church, both domestically and abroad. And so they used what they felt were the cutting-edge techniques of behavioral psychology and science to eliminate the Catholic identity from the Catholic peoples of the United States. The main way they did that, there were two ways they did it. They created the automobile, the highway system, and the suburbs. And what they did was basically convince the Catholic ethnics in the cities who lived in ethnic neighborhoods. So, there's Mexican town now, but before it was Pole Town. I mean, there's a Mexican town in Detroit. There used to be a Pole Town until it was exterminated. And it was exterminated by these people. So what you did, there are two sides to this. There's the carrot and the stick. The stick is black migration. So basically, the big foundations like the Ford Foundation promoted huge migration up from the southern states, black people, and they put them all in ethnic neighborhoods, Polish neighborhoods, Irish neighborhoods, German neighborhoods, Italian neighborhoods. They're the big four in places like Philadelphia, where I grew up. That was combined with the carrot, and the carrot was a new home in the suburbs. So basically, between these two forms of pressure, you had large numbers of Catholics moving from the city into the suburbs. Okay, when you lived in the city, you were Polish because you lived in a Polish neighborhood. As soon as you move to the suburbs, you become white. You become deracinated. Now, there's an element of confusion here that is simply part of being in the United States. So what happened in my father's generation, my grandfather came from Ireland, and my other grandfather came from German stock, from here earlier. By the time of my father's generation, the Catholics had their own identity, and they all spoke English, which was not necessarily the case in my grandparents' generation. So when the Catholics came here, originally you had Polish Catholics who couldn't speak to Irish Catholics because they didn't speak the same language. So in my father's generation, suddenly you have Catholics who can talk to each other, and they hang out together, and they fall in love with each other, and they get married. And suddenly you have someone like me who is biracial. I'm half Irish and half German. Now, that's not convincing to some people, and at the same time, you have this identity where I'm Irish and German, and there's this big pressure to identify yourself as an American, and suddenly you say, well, I guess I'm white. And the surest way to convince yourself that you're white is if you stop going to church. Because if the identity, the source of identity in America, no matter where you come from, is your religion. After 3 generations, it's Protestant, Catholic, and Jew. And so you see now, I think, how this works with Mexicans. Because if they get the Mexicans to go to a Protestant church, they're in effect changing their identity. Because that will be your ethnic identity. And there is a difference between these churches. There's no question that there's a difference. and it will become more pronounced as time goes on. And so basically you lose your affinity with the Catholics, the Catholic population, and you're shifted over into another population where it's more easy to manipulate you. That's basically, it's called the triple melting pot, and every immigrant group is subjected to these pressures when they come here. They're all pressured to assimilate on the terms of the dominant culture.
Wow. And it's crazy because this has been going on for so long, and yet when I talk to, like, you know, people at work or just, you know, my family, that they think I'm crazy. And it's crazy. We're in a time now where people can see facts and still deny them. I saw an interview with one of an ex-KGB agent, and he was saying the same thing, where you can convince somebody the truth is not the truth, then you have succeeded. Now, all this attacks against the church, that it seems to be trying to pull people away from God. What is the purpose of this, in your opinion, Dr. Jones?
Control. They're only, this again, the study of history is good because you realize there are only two options. The man who came up with this idea was St. Augustine. And he said the two options are the city of God and the city of man. The city of God is based on love and service to your fellow man. The city of man is the opposite. It has to be the opposite. But what's the opposite of love and service? Well, it's, as I say in my book, it's libido dominandi. It's the desire to dominate other people. That's the opposite. That's the form of control that is the operating system of the city of man. And that's where you go when you leave the city of God, when you leave the Catholic Church. That's where you end up. You function according to the rules of this other group of people. That's the situation. It's very simple. That's what's going on here. And we have the more people who go over to the other side, the more power these people get. And the more power these people get, the more they're tyrannical they become. And so now we're just everybody's had enough. I mean, I know Mexicans don't like Donald Trump, okay? But the point here is that this was, if you come to Indiana and you see Donald Trump, you see him as someone who represents the people. Now, whether he does or he doesn't, this was the perception because the two parties here represented the oligarchs. And so from the point of view of the people of Indiana, okay, they're poor. Why are they poor? Because the good jobs have left. And now they perceive the Mexicans as coming in and undercutting their wages. Okay, we just have to face up to the reality of the situation and deal with it. It was the same situation. I say this as a joke all the time. My first wife was an Episcopalian. I'm still married to her. We're married to her for 50 years. But her forebears, and we both come from a neighborhood in Philadelphia called Fishtown. And in the 1840s, the Protestants in Fishtown would go and throw rocks through the windows of the Catholic churches and burn them to the ground. Why did they do that? The main reason was economic, because the Irish were coming in and they were undercutting the wages of the English Protestant stock. That's what caused the resentment, and that's just a part of life. What you're seeing now across the world is the weaponization of immigration. It's much worse in Europe than it is here, okay? But it's across the board, the weaponization of immigration.
Oh, of course, yeah. It's sort of, they're using proxy warriors towards minorities. That's what it would seem. So I wanted to get into, what have you been up to lately? I haven't, what's going on with your YouTube channel? Anything you want to address with that for anyone that might have questions?
We got 2 strikes within a very short period of time on YouTube. So that meant 1 more strike. This was right at the moment when basically the ADL is launching their attack against everybody they don't like. The ADL is the Anti-Defamation League. It's a Jewish espionage money laundering operation, okay, that is basically the main instrument of thought control in the United States of America. The United States of America is different than the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union would have an official government agency as the agent of thought control. In America, they privatize this type of thing, and groups like the ADL are forms of thought control. So the ADL launched its offensive on what they called hate speech, and within within a week, we got 2 strikes on YouTube after reaching 38,000 subscribers and about 3.5 to 4 million views. Okay. In order to protect the YouTube channel, we basically made all of our videos private. And now what we're going to do, they're on BitChute. If you go to culturewars.com, you'll be able to find all of these videos, either as podcasts or as actual videos. We had to do this to preserve the channel, but in many ways, it's like the same thing that's happening. It's like St. Mary's all over again. These people, they do evil to you, but then they bring about the opposite because God's in control. And so it made us aware that this is psychological warfare. There's no other word for it. Psychological warfare is any attempt to prohibit unauthorized speech among subject peoples. We are subject peoples. We are conquered peoples. We are ruled by the oligarchs. They want to keep us down. As soon as they realize we understand things, they will shut us down. The only way to have this secure communication is by going to culturewars.com, to our website, and getting on our list, okay? Not YouTube's list or not Google's list, because they will sell your name to somebody and market you whatever you think you're going to buy. If you want to maintain contact, you have to come to our website, culturewars.com, buy something from us, get on our list, and that's the way you will establish secure channels of communication between us, between the people who feel the way I do, and other people out there.
And how is the book on Logos going? I heard you say it was finished.
I finished it. I spent a week in Michigan at a lake in the middle of nowhere, and finished the book. No YouTube, no nothing, no internet access. So I finished the book. So it's over. So now we're proofreading it, and it should be out soon.
Looking much forward to it. I've been hearing a lot about it. Well, we're going to get this wrapped up here, Dr. Jones. Anything you would like to say before we head out?
Yeah, I just like to say that there is an order to the universe, and that your mind can apprehend it, and that there's a power behind that order that will bring about your good if you collaborate with that power. And the name of that collaboration is Logos, reason. If you act according to reason and you follow Logos, you will end up with a happy life. It's that simple. This is the good news. And I think more and more people are understanding, especially people who have been enslaved through things like pornography and debt. I'm talking about 20-year-olds who have been in an especially bad situation, can't get jobs. There's a way out. There's a power that will lead you out of this mess. And the name of that power is Logos.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And thank you for stopping by. It means a lot. And I really appreciate your message, sir. Thank you for coming by.
You're welcome. Good luck.
All right.